you for the opportunity to come to speak with you today. I didn't really realize when Hank called me to ask if I would do this, if it would be such a large group, but that's great. When Hank asked me to speak, he said he was looking for an entrepreneur, so I'm going to put on my entrepreneur hat today and talk a little bit about my own experiences and also a little bit about my thoughts about the entrepreneurship situation in the United States today. As Hank said, I was born and raised in a small town in Pennsylvania, small, about 500 people. It was, I guess, technically a Yankee, even though the border of the town was a Mason-Dixon line, so I'm close there. I was born on my grandfather's farm. Let me back up a minute. This small town, I think the thing that's unique about it and important to this story is it was just full of small business. It was a typical town of the 40s and 50s before the Walmarts and the McDonald's and the Dollar Generals came along. So there was just a ton of small businessmen in town. I was born on my grandfather's farm. It was primarily a dairy farm, but he also raised and sold beef cattle, chickens, hogs, eggs. So he was sort of a small businessman and an entrepreneur himself. My dad left the farm shortly after I was born and started his own business. He and a friend who was a barber built a building on one of the corners of the square in our hometown, and they contained a barber shop, and it contained a service station and garage, which was my dad's business. I grew up in a house that was just behind the business. The important thing, I think, is within a block of where I live, there were 2 general stores. There was a restaurant, there was a bank, there was a sewing factory, there was a hardware store, there was a plumber, there was an electrician, there was a feed mill, there was a canning factory, there was a lumber mill, there were a couple of insurance salesmen, and the local doctor. So we just had a ton of small businessmen in that town, mainly almost totally owner-operated businesses, mostly started by the people who were running them. So I got a lot of exposure growing up to small business people and entrepreneurs, and some of that must have rubbed off because before I went to high school, I was involved in 4 small businesses of my own. I ran a paper route in town, which of course I learned to get things there on time and a little bit about collections. And my brothers and I raised rabbits, and we quickly found out that's one kind of asset that does multiply. So we started selling rabbits, and I ran a trap line, which on the edge of town in those days, and learned a little bit about government involvement in business, because the biggest thing that I could catch was a fox, because the state of Pennsylvania had a $4 bounty on foxes, so that was a big deal. And I also, my brothers and I had a deal with the local church to mow the graveyard. It was right next to our house there, and I learned a little bit there. It's the last 10% of the job that's often the most important, because as you can imagine, a graveyard full of gravestones involves an awful lot of trimming. And this was back before the days of weed eaters, so it was quite a job. Besides my own little businesses, I also I picked tomatoes for 12 cents a basket. I picked tomatoes. I hoed corn for $5 a day. I worked for a stonemason, mixing mud and hauling bricks. And in addition, I pumped gas and worked on cars in my dad's service station. So I had a whole range of experiences relatively early on, most of which came in useful later. When I went to Penn State, I concentrated mainly on getting an engineering degree, and the only business I operated there was run from the refrigerator in the room at my fraternity, where I bought beer by the case and sold it by the bottle. And as far as I know, it was the only business I had ever been in that was probably illegal. Running an unlicensed beer distributorship and selling liquor to minors, beer to minors. But it put a little bit of change in my pocket. After undergraduate school, as Hank was saying, I went to work for IBM in Cleveland, and was really lucky to get assigned to the NASA account out there. They had the Lewis Research Center in Cleveland, which was quite a big operation there. It's now John Glenn Research Center. And I was part of a 7-person team that installed the computers and set up the operations for NASA in Cleveland. And it was good exposure to all of IBM's product line because we did the installation of their business computers, so we saw that end of the business. We did the installation of the scientific computers, so we saw that end of the business. In fact, we had the fastest computing setup in the country at that time, and maybe in the world, for NASA. And they used that at least partially, perhaps mainly, to do the trajectory calculations for the Apollo moonshots. So it was quite a really great experience. One of the other things I gained there was 2 of the team members were women, and the gal who managed the programmers at NASA, which was quite a large group, was also a woman. So this was sort of my first experience of working with the fair sex. I decided by this time I was really much more interested in business than I was in engineering, so I applied to graduate business school, was accepted, and after a little over 2 years at IBM, my wife and I and our young son trucked up to Boston to business school. In 2 years up there, I tried to learn everything I could absorb and about business, and I think one of the key things I learned there is although you can work with other people in planning a situation, when it comes time to sell it and to defend your ideas, you're pretty much on your own. I'd always been interested in flying and airplanes, so I left the business school. I went to Pittsburgh and went to work for a company that made business aircraft. And there was an experience in how not to do things. It was really a terribly run situation. I won't get into details, but part of it being an entrepreneur is to see failure, learn from failure, and move on. So after about 9 months, I figured I learned all I could about that failure, and I moved on. Went to work, found another company in Pittsburgh that had a product line that they thought was much less profitable than some of their other product lines, and they wanted somebody to come in and fix it. So I came in, but very shortly on managed to convince management that the product line was perfectly profitable, was equally profitable to the rest of the product lines. They were just using the wrong profitability measures. So a lesson that if you're going to measure businesses and activities, you better use the right yardstick. Since they didn't need me to fix that product line, I moved over to another division of the company, which really started me on the path to Charlotte. The company, one of the major product lines was steel piling. You drive into the ground to put bridges on, and buildings on, and so on. And they had a small pile driving equipment business. They basically imported French-made pile drivers and sold them and rented them throughout their offices in the United States. So I was involved in that for about 4 years when the 2 of us that were involved in management kind of looked at the situation and said, well, number one, this is not a core business of this company, and it's probably not going to be a focus of their growth going forward. And 2, this is a family company, and they've got some smart family people in the business, and they've got some more smart people coming up, so probably the promotional opportunities are probably not going to be that great. So we said probably we can do this ourselves. So the 2 of us and another sales guy made the decision to leave and start our own company. A couple of the early decisions were what to call it and where to locate it. Since we're going to be in the construction equipment business, that was natural. We hoped we would go international. So we chose the name International Construction Equipment, or ICE, as we're generally known in the industry. As far as where to locate it, there were really 2 options. The New York, New Jersey area has a lot of infrastructure construction going on just because there are a lot of people up there that need a lot of infrastructure. The other area that there was a good bit of pile driving going on because of the interstate program was in the southeast. So by a vote of 3-0, we decided we'd come south. And we're still here, so obviously it was a good decision. Once we decided to come south, we got a map of the southeast out, and we said, okay, here's 11 states, what's in the center? And we looked, and it was Charlotte. And only one of us had ever been to Charlotte, but it seemed a reasonable sized city, and it had airplanes coming in and from system coming in, and that's all we needed. So we came down and set up the operation in Charlotte. And as I said, because we're still here, it's worked out well. As far as the risk was concerned, we had about enough money to last about 12 months, we figured, if we really lived pretty quietly. And we knew that to design and develop our major product line would take us about 7 or 8 months. So we had about a 4-month cushion in there. Fortunately, everything worked out well. The product worked. We finally got it in the field, and we were able to go ahead and grow. And I will say that there was significant risks in jumping out, as there always is, putting what little money we had on the line. And you know, it's really a great help to an entrepreneur if you got really good support at home. And I can't remember any time over all these years and all these companies that my wife has ever said, "Don't do that, it's too risky." Shortly after we set up ICE down here, we did a deal with a couple guys and set up ICE Northeast to market our products in the northeast part of the country. We also set up ICE Southwest with a couple guys down there to market the equipment down there. And about 3 years after we started ICE here in the Carolinas, we decided we were in fact ready to go abroad. And we happened to know a couple Dutch guys from trade shows and so on. So we contacted them, and ICE Holland grew out of that to market our equipment in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And then fairly quickly came along ICE Far East in Singapore, with branches in Hong Kong and Kuala Lumpur. So by that time, we had the world pretty much covered in our product line. Now we are a major factor in the business. Our logo, our ICE logo, and our colors, and pretty much around the world in foundation construction equipment. About 1980, we were in Holland, and we noticed along the side of the road a small, what looked like a pile driving rig. So of course we went over, got closer to see what was going on. And it turned out that the rig was installing a plastic soil drainage wick into the ground. It would drive a steel mandrel into the ground with this wick inside, and then pull the mandrel out, leaving the wick, and move over and do it again until it had drainage wicks all over the job site. And we looked at that application and said, well, that's something that might work in the States. So we ran down the people that made the drainage wick material and also the installation rig, who happened to be the same people, and did a deal with them to import the drain and sell it in the States, and to take some of their technology to form a contracting company to do the drain installation over here. In order to market that product, we formed American Wick Drain Corporation, which is the other of our major companies. And that was started in 1982. And about 2 or 3 years later, we had enough volume going on in a product we didn't feel we needed to import it from Europe anymore. We started making it here. That product line has expanded. And now we probably have, I don't know, 40 or 50% market share in the States in the prefabricated drainage market. We did set up an American Wick Drain in Europe when we started shipping enough product over there that the freight got too expensive, and that company is still ongoing, although we don't have a piece of it anymore. Get on the right page here. We've done a little backward integration with the drain company. Initially, we bought plastic sheet and formed core. We did move backwards a little bit, buying recycled plastic ourselves, and now forming the sheet. And now we're looking at moving backward a little bit further and then buying a recycling company so we can create our own input stream. So that's a little bit of the history of Dick Morris and the companies. As Hank says, there are little fringe companies that are related to this, and the numbers, some are around 20, some of which are still going, and some of which have been merged into other ones. And sometimes the entrepreneurial spirit takes you maybe someplace you shouldn't go. As Hank said, our younger son lives in Jacksonville, Wyoming. My major partner is a Wyoming resident, no sale and no income tax out here. So we took a look at we started to spend a good bit of time in Jackson's Hole, so we're looking around and said the real estate market out here is really active and there's a lot of trading going on, and this looks like easy money. So we started trading a little bit of real estate, and probably we should have been focused on our major companies, but couldn't resist. So we did buy and sell some lots. We built 4 spec houses for resale, and fortunately we sold the last spec house in early 2008 before things really started to go downhill. So, luck is an important element of entrepreneurship too. Sometimes there's a question about whether an entrepreneur is born or raised. The old sort of nature versus nurture question. And without a doubt, you can teach entrepreneurial skills. You can teach business planning and communication and market analysis. And I've got a good friend from business school days that teaches entrepreneurship at Brandeis, and he's certainly convinced that you can teach the skills. The question is really whether you can teach somebody to take risks, put their time and their money on the line, and maybe the bank's money on the line, and the shareholders' money on the line, and still sleep at night. Or whether you can sell your ideas to somebody and get them to follow you. Or whether or not you can see failure, perhaps fail, learn from it, and move on and forget about it. And whether or not you're really a hunter. We had an employment guy who came out and did some analysis on some of our folks and said they're hunters and they're gatherers. Well, entrepreneurs have to be hunters. You've got to be looking for business opportunities all the time. And I think it's just part of the game. One of my favorite people to read is Lee Kuan Yew, the senior minister of Singapore. And he has said that he feels that people are about 70% the way they are, and there's only 30% that you can work with to try to change them. So from that aspect, I guess maybe entrepreneurs are 70% born and 30% trained. The Economist magazine in a recent article said that in their judgment, 1 in 13 Americans is an entrepreneur. I assume they're maybe talking about the working class or working age population, but they said 1 in 13 or 17.5% of the American population. They compared that to the next highest country, which was the Netherlands at 6.5%, and then Great Britain at 4%, and then France, Sweden, and Germany at 3%. So in their judgment, there's a lot of entrepreneurs in the United States, more than any place else. And again, going back to Lee Kuan Yew, he said this, and I'll read it so I get it correctly, that there are 4 salient features of America's entrepreneurial culture. 1, a national emphasis on personal independence and self-reliance. 2, respect for those starting new businesses. 3, an acceptance of failure in entrepreneurial and innovative efforts. And 4, a tolerance for a high degree of income disparity. It's interesting to think about, to the degree that he's right, just how the current group of people in Washington, and whether they're promoting that sort of an attitude in the United States or whether they're trying to subdue it. I'm afraid it may be the latter, excuse me. There's a little bit of a light in the end of the tunnel where somebody perhaps that sees it the right way. Edward the Peacock, who obviously is running for mayor today, was quoted in the Observer earlier this week saying that the key to future job growth is small private companies. And he also said at one event he highlighted the need for more risk-taking business culture that rewards high growth and startups. So I think there's somebody there that seems to be on the right track. I think that, thank you. We'll have any time for questions, or what you do? I got 5 minutes. Are there any questions? Yes.